Welcome to today's explainer on the McNamara Fallacy. Think about those dashboards you're frantically checking every single morning, right? Or the step tracker buzzing on your wrist. Or maybe those kind of meaningless KPIs you've got to report to your boss. We are, let's face it, absolutely obsessed with hard data. But what if our total reliance on those numbers is actually leading us entirely astray? Well, today, we're going to unpack the absolute perils of this quantitative obsession.
Okay, let's dive into this. We measure what we can, not what we should. I want you to just let the weight of that sink in for a second. This one single sentence perfectly captures a massive flaw in human nature and, honestly, modern management as a whole. When we're faced with these huge, complex problems, we instinctively look for the easiest way to prove we're doing a good job, right? We look for the things we can actually count. But we really have to ask ourselves, are we counting those things because they actually matter, or just because they're the easiest things to count? Just because a metric is sitting right there, readily available, doesn't mean it's actually valuable. And yet, time and time again, we just swap in the convenience of easy data and we skip the incredibly difficult task of figuring out what truly matters.
So to really wrap our heads around this trap, we've got to look at where the name actually comes from. Robert McNamara. He was the former U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, and the guy was famously deeply obsessed with metrics. In the middle of a highly complex guerrilla conflict, he decided he was going to measure success almost entirely by enemy body counts. He aggressively tracked this easily quantifiable metric, but at the same time, he completely ignored things like the plunging morale of the troops, the super complex political landscape, and the actual willpower of the local population. And, well, it was a totally catastrophic miscalculation. So that brings us to our formal definition. The McNamara fallacy is this incredibly dangerous tendency to measure success based solely on easily quantifiable metrics, while completely ignoring the more important but much harder to measure factors.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this sets up a kind of battle between two competing forces whenever we're evaluating something. On one side, you've got these heavy, loud, super easily quantifiable metrics. We're talking revenue, clicks, units produced, hours logged, things that are precise and really satisfying to look at on a spreadsheet. But on the other side, you have these much quieter, subtle realities, things like team morale, customer trust, institutional knowledge, or strategic resilience. The fallacy really kicks in when we let those heavy, easy numbers completely weigh down the scale. We end up treating the harder-to-measure factors like they don't even exist, and when they're pitted against each other like this, those easy numbers almost always win the battle for our attention.
But you've got to wonder, why do highly intelligent people continually fall victim to this? Well, it all stems from a deeply ingrained, honestly really dangerous antagonist in our decision-making process, the assumption. The core assumption here is that what can be measured is somehow inherently more important than what cannot. It's this totally flawed logic that silently rewrites our priorities. We actually start to believe that if something is ambiguous or if it needs actual human judgment to evaluate, well, it must be less valid. We literally start worshiping the metric itself. We elevate the data point completely above the real-world outcome it was supposed to represent in the first place. It's kind of like a virus in a system, quietly convincing us that anything we can't perfectly quantify is just totally irrelevant.
So the crucial point is, the reality is completely different. In fact, the absolute opposite is usually true. The most crucial, vital aspects of a project or a policy, they're often incredibly difficult or even entirely impossible to actually quantify. Think about the stuff that actually determines whether a project lives or dies. We're talking about the passion of your team, the genuine deep loyalty of a customer base, or the true ethical foundation of a policy. You just cannot easily assign a neat little numeric value to human ingenuity, and there's absolutely no way you can put a precise percentage on trust. And yet, these are the exact elements that actually carry a project through the really tough times.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when you combine that tendency to only track easy metrics with the false assumption that only those metrics matter. You get a really dangerous result, a totally incomplete and incredibly misleading picture of success. This right here is where the true peril reveals itself. Because look, you could be staring at a dashboard that is just full of green arrows. You can hit every single KPI. Your spreadsheets could look literally flawless. But guess what? The project itself could still be fundamentally failing. By ignoring all those unmeasurable variables, you're basically creating a complete illusion of achievement. It's like navigating a ship using a map that only shows you the smooth, open waters while completely leaving out the massive hidden reefs sitting directly in your path.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory we're talking about here. It actually plays out every day in the highest stakes arenas in the world. Think about the business world. It's slashing research and development just to hit those short-term quarterly profit targets, only to go completely bankrupt a few years later because, well, the innovation died out. Or in government, it's judging a totally complex education policy purely by standardized test scores, while completely, utterly ignoring student well-being or critical thinking skills. And in military strategy, just like we saw with McNamara, it's evaluating a war purely by body counts and totally missing the entire massive political reality on the ground. In every single one of these fields, relying solely on the hard numbers leads to absolutely catastrophic miscalculations.
Let's move on and see how this builds into our overall strategy. How do we actually safeguard ourselves against this trap? Well, we have to fundamentally change how we evaluate success. The big lesson of the McNamara fallacy is absolutely not that data is bad. Not at all. Data is essential. Quantitative factors give us our baseline, our hard facts, our measurable progress. But they absolutely must be paired with qualitative factors. We've got to actively evaluate that human element, the surrounding context, the nuance, and the long-term impact. We literally have to be willing to just sit with ambiguity sometimes. Because true evaluation requires the discipline to look at the numbers, for sure, but then it requires the profound wisdom to actually look up from the spreadsheet and ask, what is this data fundamentally failing to tell me right now?
Ultimately, the McNamara fallacy acts a lot like a mirror, reflecting our own daily habits right back at us. So I want you to think about the metrics you're using every single day to judge your own progress. Ask yourself, really honestly, when evaluating your own success, are you ignoring the unmeasurable? Are you maybe falling for that illusion of control that numbers give us, while the truly critical factors are just slipping through the cracks completely unnoticed? Remember this, just because you can't count it, absolutely doesn't mean it doesn't count. Take this concept, apply it to your own dashboards, and start measuring not just what you can, but what you truly should. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep asking the hard questions.